Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board.
America's export of soybeans helps the U.S. maintain a positive agricultural trade balance. Nebraska contributes half of its soybeans for export. The protein and oil content in soybeans enhance the growing demand for higher protein diets. The Nebraska Soybean Board promotes research to develop new soybean varieties with higher protein and oil content for major agricultural markets. The Nebraska Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up.
Market Journal, television for making agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln Extension, where you can know how, know now. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board. The Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up.
Welcome to this week's edition of Market Journal. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. Our show this week is a special 2012 year-end retrospective. We've taken short clips from each of our 51 episodes to feature the major stories from January through December. In the world of agriculture, among the biggest stories is the historic drought that put over half of all counties in the United States under disaster declaration, withered crops, and forced livestock producers to thin their herds. It continues to handcuff those feeders with high prices, and in the absence of repeated winter storms, most Nebraska crop growers will enter the 2013 season with a severely depleted soil profile. As you watch this episode, you'll notice a drastic color change in the drought monitor from May to November. We also followed the lack of progress in Washington on the 2012 Farm Bill and the uncertainty it brought to farmers and ranchers. You'll get a glimpse of our travels in 2012, to shipping ports along the West Coast, to the crowded streets of China, and to numerous locations around this state. Our weekly shows aim to help you make more informed management decisions. You'll hear abbreviated opinions from some of our marketing analysts coming up, which can all be easily judged individually in hindsight, but we hope they give you a glimpse of what markets we're following in each of their respective news cycles. With 51 shows, this will be a quick ride through 2012. We'll start off in our January 6th episode as South American weather concerns were fittingly impacting markets here at home.
You know, typically what we see is the market gradually starting around the 1st of January or the 1st of the new year. In the corn market especially, just a gradual uptrend going all the way through the middle of June. Now, individual years don't necessarily look like that, but on the average that's what happens. And you know, I guess I'm fairly optimistic that unless this South American weather thing just turns into a complete flop, I'm fairly optimistic that we're going to see gradual improvement in prices as the winter wears on and spring comes.
The Farm Bill is supposed to be done by September 2012.
Right.
Any reason to think that it's not going to be?
Well, this debate starts over. Perhaps here in the coming months we'll see a substantial committee debate, but there's every reason to think that in the midst of an election campaign that we have a lot of discussion. We probably don't reconcile anything until a lame duck Congress returns after the election.
I think we're going to have big acres in the spring, provided we don't have a weather problem here. Yeah. I think corn doesn't really get a chance to get away from us here and will eventually go down.
Parts of the state are lacking the crucial moisture needed to fill the soil profile during the recharge period, defined as October 1st through April 30th. UNL Extension statewide climatologist Al Dutcher says while it's difficult to get accurate moisture readings because of frozen soil, the questions in portions of Nebraska are still timely.
If we maintain normal precipitation from now going forward, some areas in northeastern Nebraska still might see 7.5% to up to 12.5% yield reductions in terms of their baseline projections going forward for their corn crop, simply because that lack of that moisture during this period has not been made up.
Weldon Slice says the buildings help NCTA achieve its goal of educating and preparing students to eventually take over agricultural businesses in rural Nebraska.
It's critically important. As you look around rural Nebraska, the majority of our small towns are in trouble. We're losing residents at a phenomenal rate, and especially our young people. We just can't sustain that.
On the feeder cattle side, absolutely the key is how big this corn crop is and what happens from Mother Nature. We have market analysts talking about a corn acreage planted this year somewhere between about 92.8 million acres and 94.8 million acres.
It's a big boat to turn whenever we're going to increase a number of cattle here in the United States. We tend to go through a 10-year cyclical period. We may start to see those total cattle numbers start to turn and increase by the beginning of 2015. It takes a while to have the heifers develop to go in as replacements, and we need to not be killing as many cull cows as we have been also if we plan on increasing our calf crop.
In less than 3 weeks, corn and soybean farmers will need to finalize their crop insurance plans. As you'll see in our feature with Rob Hyan from Crop Insurance Solutions, that decision for some farmers begins with one common question.
You know, a lot of times it's what's everybody else doing.
Number one, it will survive. You know, right now it looks like it certainly is going to survive with the situation that we have now. Thriving is going to be more difficult because we're seeing overall gasoline demand coming down. We haven't met the type of demand that we saw in late 2007, early 2008, ever since the economic bust happened in 2008 through early 2009. Gasoline demand has not come back.
Two bills before the Nebraska legislature aim to change the state's corn and wheat checkoff programs. Both bills were submitted by Senator Tom Carlson of Holdridge. LB 1057 would raise the corn checkoff from 1/4 cent per bushel of corn sold to 1/2 cent per bushel. The current wheat checkoff differs from corn and soybeans in that each sale carries a set amount, no matter the price, 1¼ cents per bushel. LB 905 would alter that structure.
At least on the surface, things look pretty good. We've had moisture over the winter, and the surface moisture is looking fairly decent in many areas. But there's a lot of regions where when you start getting down to the subsoil, start getting down 2 feet, 3 feet deep, we start getting quite a bit drier, and we haven't had a full recharge of the soil's water holding capacity. So we're sitting at kind of a balancing point here, where if we don't have abundant or at least the normal spring rains, we're going to be going into the heat of summer with possibly a little less rain and a little less moisture than what we normally would have.
For many Nebraska soybeans, the ride ends here, half a country away from the fields they were grown in. Grays Harbor and Tacoma, two major shipping ports for goods moving to China, Japan, and other countries in the Pacific Rim. On a see-for-yourself trip to the Washington coast, these Nebraska producers got a glimpse of equipment and machinery used to supply customers with their soybeans.
The corn number, you know, everybody's expecting a pretty big corn number. Most of the week we had seen some softening of corn prices with the expectation we're going to get close to that 95 number. And of course, the number we had this morning was actually outside of the trade range, which is, again, a bit negative for the new crop pricing. So that was the biggest surprise. Again, on the soybean side, we were expecting a little bit lower on soybeans. Again, this number came out to be below the trade expectations.
Fast forward to this week, as Beef Products Incorporated, a producer of the meat, has shut down plants in Iowa, Kansas, and Texas. Its plant in South Sioux City remains open, and 3 governors and 2 lieutenant governors, including Nebraska's Rick Sheehy, toured that plant on Thursday to support the product and its workers.
Now, east of there and west of there, no significant moisture, if at all, just a few sprinkles. So our precipitation deficits continue to increase, and we're starting to get very, very concerned because we should be getting a 1/2 inch right now per week. By the end of April, we'll be up to 3/4 inch. So each week we go without precipitation, those deficits increase rather dramatically.
Absolutely. You saw that LFTB deal come in there and come in at a really bad time and started this snowball effect. And until demand catches, demand's got to catch somewhere here, I hope. This thing's going to be kind of sick, and you're seeing a lot of red ink in feed yards already, and it's going to get worse.
Well, the KORUS agreement, the free trade agreement with South Korea, was something that agriculture was very interested in and pushed very hard for. A lot of our agricultural commodities, corn, soybeans, wheat, the tariffs went to 0 with the implementation of the trade agreement.
So we are higher now, or stronger. We have stronger basis levels now than we saw last year at this time by quite a bit. But I would say there's maybe only about 20 cents more of push in the basis level before you start running up against the record high of what we ever even saw even last summer, last July, very early August before the harvest started to come on. Basis levels here in Nebraska at the ethanol plants were about 40 over the September at that point, which was crazy. And And if we, to get to that point again now, to get to 40 over the July, we'd have to have, like I said, another 20 cents.
The likelihood that we'll pass a new farm bill by September seems to be virtually nil. The Senate may in fact get its work done here in the next couple weeks or so and get a bill through the Senate, but then the House has to act, and it would appear that they're going to take a very different track, at least in initial discussion. The chances of getting something through by September seem impossible.
The CME Group announced on Tuesday it would expand grain futures trading to 22-hour sessions.
What I think it's going to require them to do is it's going to require them to come into a crop report with a more thought-out plan. What they're going to have to think about is that if I get a certain result, if it's a bullish response or a bearish response, what am I going to do right away?
The USDA released projected numbers for the 2012 crop on Thursday morning. The agency projects a record U.S. corn crop of 14.8 billion bushels, with average yield at a historic 166 bushels per acre. The USDA expects U.S. farmers to produce 3.2 billion bushels of soybeans for the 2012-2013 crop due to higher yields.
But what we are starting to see is an expansion toward the northwest from the southeast, where it's been extremely dry, and we're starting to see dryness issues returning back to the southern plains, and we're also seeing some pretty extensive dryness all the way up in the central Rockies, where the snowpack now has dropped below 40%, and by all estimates is likely to be completely gone in the southern half of the Rocky Mountains by the time we get to the June.
Planting across the state continues to roll on, with Nebraska farmers nearly finished with this year's corn crop at 98% complete. 78% of that corn is now emerged. Soybean planting is 13 days ahead of the average at 83% complete. Other crops continue to stay ahead of schedule as well. Wheat is 81% headed. That's 19 days ahead of normal. And first cutting of alfalfa is 3 weeks ahead of the average. We're talking on Tuesday morning, and this thing seems to be changing by the day, but troubles in Europe continue to lag over the market as a whole. What can you do, or what can farmers do to plan ahead and manage the risk that could come from Greece defecting from the euro or anything else that might come out of that region?
Well, that's a great question, Jeff. I think we need to understand our numbers. We need to be diligent, knowing what it takes for each and every operation, to know what their break even is. At the current levels today, is that a profitable sale for you or not? And then look at it in terms of, okay, if this thing does head south, what am I comfortable risking on that? Is that a third of my operation, or is it half my operation? Everybody's gonna be a little bit different on that. But I think everybody needs to look at it and be aware that somewhere down the road, it's gonna change.
But the 2011 average net farm income produced a number that was far and away a record.
Another record income, and I really didn't expect to see it. I didn't know what for sure we'd see, but the producers that we work with managed to take advantage of some good crop prices. They had great yields, and we ended up with an average net farm income of about $400,000.
That's a huge jump.
It's a huge number. I look back 10 years and our average was $25,000. We were thinking that was pretty good. I remember the year we hit 40, thinking that was really a great year. So, this is just kind of an unbelievable number.
In terms of the drought, we have seen another northward expansion of the drought area, from Kansas now incorporating all of the southern tier counties of Nebraska in what we would consider moderate drought conditions, with the possibility that we'll have to upgrade some areas to severe if we return to some very dry weather here in the future. And of course, the panhandle, that dryness area is expanding eastward, and abnormally dry conditions cover almost the entire state outside of northeastern Nebraska.
Well, this year we've had considerable weeks where the ET gauge has dropped by 2 inches or more, compared to the last several years where we've only really had 1 or 2 weeks in eastern Nebraska where that's occurred. So as a result, the crop water use is more this year.
For farmers in the Midwest, producing desirable grains like corn and beans, the Chinese market looks bright, though how long the window of opportunity remains open is unsure. As one analyst says, China may match demands in some areas, but with increases in population and income, the country can't meet its growing needs without help. Senators last Thursday passed the Agricultural Reform, Food and Jobs Act of 2012 by a vote of 64-35. The Senate's version of the Farm Bill aims to cut $23 billion over 10 years. When broken down by district, the USDA National Agricultural Statistics Service has every part of the state below normal in precipitation. The closest to par is east central Nebraska, which stands at 94% of normal since April 1st. The driest area is the Northwest District at 45% of normal. This panhandle has averaged a little over an inch of rainfall per month since April 1st, and grass fires are now becoming commonplace. In fact, the haze in the area today is smoke from a fire or fires in the west.
I look back at last year's prices of corn, and we had right around Labor Day, we had cash corn over $7 a bushel. And so I sort of had that out there as a target that I might start thinking about making some sales if we saw the cash bid for this fall over $7 a bushel. And as of this morning, it wasn't there yet. The other thing I guess I'd say is, you know, here we are, the middle of July. It's time to be getting all those reports to the FSA office and to your crop insurance, because under these conditions, we sure want to be absolutely positive that we've got our crop insurance in place and that we've got our yields and everything in place for the acre program, because they will give us some help if this thing continues any longer.
Generally, soybeans will still be yield good if we start getting rains from this point on out, equal to the amount of water that's needed to, you know, to make replace all the water that's transpiring from the leaves. But irrigators are still having a tough time keeping up, because bean plants like behind us are evaporating anywhere from 3/10 to 4/10 a day.
Can you put that in a context? How much?
Okay, that's when we talk about 3/10. An inch of water per acre is 27,000 gallons spread an acre to inch over, or spread over an acre. So a third of an inch here would be 9,000 gallons per acre that are evaporating from these soybean leaves.
So these companies have the capacity to cover this loss. I don't see any chance that they cannot make these claims. These small companies, if somebody should fail, and I don't really expect that either because they buy reinsurance, but if that should happen, ultimately the federal government's obligated to take it over.
USDA on Wednesday added 218 counties to the list of natural disaster areas. The total, as of this taping, now stands at 1,584 counties. That's over half of the counties in the country.
We could be looking at a multi-year problem here because there's no guarantee that we're going to start rebuilding corn stocks with the 2013 crop. It's going to be difficult, and so we're going to see demand stay sluggish or possibly down for 1, maybe 2 more years.
You know, some things China can produce for itself. For instance, it can produce rice itself, and it's becoming more competitive in terms of poultry production and, you know, fresh fruit production. But there's some products it definitely cannot produce for itself. For instance, soybeans. You know, last year China imported almost $15 billion worth of soybeans. It imported equal to production from equal to the state of Indiana.
The other thing is being a little cautious yet about nitrates. Typically we aren't going to worry too much about nitrates in cornfields, but in places where, for instance, maybe the corn only got 3 feet tall and the cows are going to graze it all the way to the ground, those could be some pretty hot areas that we may want to fence out if we're going to be grazing, just in case those are real hot spots.
The damage can allow fungal infection and promote the accumulation of some of the mycotoxins like aflatoxin. And so if they scout the fields that are at high risk and husk back several ears, they should be looking for an olive green mold, or they'll see the spores. They look dusty on the surface of those kernels that are usually damaged.
While only some of the Farm Bill is directly related to crop insurance, critics of that portion argue payments are too large. That increased this week as the USDA forecasted 2012 net farm income at $122.2 billion, up 3.7% from last year.
This surprises crop producers because in their mind they're thinking, oh, what happens if it decreases my yield? Okay, in this field we're doing a corn-soybean rotation, so that it's in soybeans the year after corn. The yield is statistically increased by 2 bushels per acre by grazing. And that's not a year, that's 16 years of data. It's really solid data.
Do you have a level in mind there, a price level in mind that you think demand might start to ration at?
I believe that corn is going to have to dramatically slow ethanol production and livestock production, and I think it's going to take a price above $9, even if we get a waiver of the RFS in order to do that. Soybeans, I think it's going to take a price above $20. That doesn't mean it'll happen next week, or next month. It may have to be next spring when that happens, but I believe that's what's going to have to take place.
If there's any nitrates that are going to accumulate, they would accumulate down here in the bottom 1/3 of the stalk. So that would be really where we would not want to force cattle. The Wisconsin data would say that there's probably, in drought years, very high nitrate levels here.
In New York on October 1st, there's going to be a 2% mandate on biofuels going into the home heating market, and it's going to be a 20 million market share going into that of B100. And that's going to take a lot of the soybean oil that's produced from the soybeans and soybean meal here in the state of Nebraska and go back there, so that will add value to the oil and to the meal and eventually back to the producers here in the state of Nebraska.
House and Senate members face a September 30th deadline to agree on legislation. We talked with Brad Lubin this week about the future of the Farm Bill and what happens on the morning of October 1st.
Well, nothing just yet. Technically, the authorization for the 08 Farm Bill expires on September 30th, and pending approval of a new bill, or in this case, as Congress failed to do, even an extension of the current bill, we do revert to 1949 legislation. It's the so-called permanent legislation of the Farm Bill.
We're coming off again a drought here in the U.S. We all know that. We got to watch South America, and if they have a drought, if they stumble like we did, soybeans are going to run, corn's going to run, because it's more imperative that we get acres planted and that the weather cooperates accordingly. I think about Christmas time will be the key. There's no doubt they're going to have a scare at some point, but if you wake up Christmas and it's hot and dry in South America, that's your Christmas present, because you're gonna go sharply higher. But if they have normal weather, on the flip side, they can grow us out of the bean crop, and I think they can have enough corn and beans back in the pipeline by February, early March.
So I think that we're going to see both a colder winter with a little bit more precipitation. And as far as will this be enough to really make a difference in the soil moisture profiles, I think it's going to be very minimal, just because in wintertime you don't get that much moisture that really gets into the ground anyway.
MILC, or Milk Income Loss Contract, is going to expire, actually did expire when the old Farm Bill expired. And that was a way for producers to add some additional income. It was meant to have a target price and then get paid a deficiency payment if that target price wasn't met.
In Nebraska, and we'll use Nebraska as a proxy for all the major producing states, you go back 5 or 6 years and they had great margins. But in the last year or two, those margins have become less and less. And as we look for this year at the margin for ethanol, it's actually negative.
And then the other thing is the whole supply side. I mean, everybody's got to understand that Nebraska historically turned 3% of its land each year. So at any given time, you'd expect a piece of ground to come up for sale probably once every 33, 35 years, something like that. Now we're changing 1.26% of the land per year. Like in my county, in Platte County, where I'm at, 0.66% of the land sold last year, 2011. So we're talking about a particular piece of ground coming up for sale once every 100 years or so.
If we use it judiciously, I think that can go around. In fact, that's our goal. How do we kind of optimize use now rather than maximize? Because we had plenty of it the last 4 or 5 years, and so we were encouraging ways to use more and more of the distillers' grains. This year we got to think about how do we ration it.
There was this risk factor that was built into the market saying, well, we're not really sure how bad the conditions are, and we're getting more information now about what actual yields are coming out to be, and they're a little bit better than we had expected. The other thing, as we got into the rationing mode of the marketplace, high prices are expected to try and ration use, and we've already seen some of the use cut back. Some of the end users are shifting to other sources. They're actually using less than we had expected. So I do, as we look forward in time, I think we're going to see, there's still some uncertainty in the market, obviously, but I do think that we have seen the highs in the market for at least for the next several months.
A little bit more interesting as you get west of here, because we've been persistently dry now for the last couple of months here in the center part of the state, and we've already accumulated a couple inches of deficits across a good portion of the state, particularly north and west of the I-80 corridor from Lincoln to Omaha. And again, we're going to be running out of time to get those soil moisture profiles charged back up in time for spring. So it's going to have to be a very wet winter and a very wet spring to make up some of these differences.
There's a possibility that growers are starting to think about abandoning their crop and stuff. Maybe just a little early to do that. We've had, as you mentioned, unusually warm weather this fall. if we were to get a little precipitation while we've got some of these warm days, maybe a little bit more wheat would come, and we could get a little bit better stands. But at this point, there's nothing else that we're going to plant this fall. So leaving that crop until the spring would behoove most growers.
It looks like we're going to have a new record high cost of production this year when all said and done, somewhere around 66, 67 cents a pound on a live weight basis cost of production. Losses for the year are probably on average somewhere in the $15 to $20 per hog range.
The thing is eventually you're going to have all-time record beef prices. Now if the consumer doesn't have any money, you've got a serious challenge there. So but there's so many other good things, like you said, gas prices lower, so they've got more disposable income because they're not pumping it away in their tank. And I think there's so many things out there that can help us, once again, if people do the right thing.
The other aspect of the fiscal cliff is whether we go over it or we don't. I tell agricultural producers you can plan on paying 10 to 12% more in income tax, regardless of whether we go over the cliff. So what's happening is it's changing the psychology. And you know, our moms and dads and grandmothers and grandfathers had to manage volatility. We have to manage volatility at the extreme. And so what it does to agricultural producers, it locks them up. And so what I tell them is do scenario planning and you know, do 5 or 10 different scenarios on revenues and costs and plow through it.
Each of today's clips is taken from aired shows in 2012. They can all be found in their entirety on the Market Journal website and YouTube page. As we close out the year, Curtis and I would like to thank the guests who've appeared on Market Journal over the last 12 months. And we'd especially like to thank you as a viewer for tuning in or logging on to watch this program. We look forward to bringing you the important stories of 2013. From all of us here at Market Journal, thanks for watching. We'll see you next year.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board. The Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln Extension, where you can know how, know now. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board.
A diesel-powered engine on a farm works hard and operates in a grueling environment. Soy biodiesel fuels stand up to the challenge of powering farm equipment, but are also renewable and environmentally responsible as well. The Nebraska Soybean Board is committed to encouraging the use of soy biodiesel to protect the environment and sustain Nebraska's agriculture. The Nebraska Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up.